Welcome to another episode of Commending and Contending. It's a podcast about how the gospel of Jesus encourages us to live our lives and use our words to commend and contend for Jesus and his gospel. I'm your host, Jonathan Holt. Joining me today is Andrew Beddoe. G'day, Andrew.
G'day, Jonathan.
Tell us, Andrew, where's God planted you?
So we're my family, Emma, my wife, and four kids. We live in southwest Sydney in Campbelltown, just in a little suburb called St Andrews. There's lots of everyday people that live in this part of Sydney, and we enjoy going to the local Anglican church in Leppington.
And Andrew, how's God been encouraging you recently?
Yeah, I was chatting with a guy this week who I've been discipling for probably about 13 years now. He's a guy that many would overlook in this world. He hasn't achieved a lot. In terms of material success, he works in a factory. He but he loves the Lord. He wants his family to know Jesus. He was the first person in his family to become a Christian. And he shared with me this week his excitement that he's just been able to begin reading the Bible with his sister, who is now becoming open to knowing more about Jesus. And so that's just been an encouragement to see God using this ordinary guy to see people come into his kingdom and work in this guy's family and to share the joy that he's had in seeing his family, more and more of his family come to know Jesus.
That is super encouraging. Not only the long-term discipling relationship you've had there, but that moment where you see the delight and share his delight
Mm.
in having God's word as a resource he can use with his family, with his sister. That's
Mm.
marvelous. Andrew, you used the phrase everyday people, and I think I saw that same phrase in an article you've written for the Gospel Coalition Australia, and it stems from particular work and thinking you've done. Um,
Mm.
what is it that you want us to hear about everyday people?
Yeah, so everyday people is a phrase that we use to describe the people who go straight into the workforce from school. They don't go to university, they don't get a degree. They're people who like to learn by doing. They're practical. Sometimes they're known as working class people, sometimes as blue collar. We've gone with everyday because this group of people is really quite large. They make up 70% of the working population in Australia, but they're not confined to the trades like a blue collar worker might be. And in Australia, we don't tend to talk about being in a class society with working class, although Jimmy Barnes did write that song in the 80s, the working class man. That was a bit of a favorite for a while. But yeah, we're thinking about hairdressers, factory workers, chefs, tradies, truck drivers, a whole wide range of people that I suppose fit this category. And because they do make up 70% of the population, they're the norm, if you like, because they're the majority, calling them everyday people. And that's a term that they don't mind. They like that term. It's not a derogatory term. It's not a demeaning term. It's quite a positive thing to just be everyday, to be ordinary.
And this has filled up a large percentage of your kind of work time and thinking and where you're called in ministry. Tell us about that. What's that like?
So I grew up in a Christian family, and I assumed as I was growing up that I'd just do what my parents did, which was have what you might call a normal secular sort of job, working uh, in a school or some other area, and being involved in my local church with small groups and youth ministry, etc. But when I was about 16, God began to give me a heart for unreached people. My mum had given me some books by missionaries, and God opened my eyes to how there were many people in the world who didn't have the opportunity to go to a church close to where they lived to learn about Jesus and be encouraged in knowing Him. And so, knowing how much God has done for me as someone who's been saved by the death and resurrection of Jesus, I thought, well, what could I do for God? And I'd love to be able to share what I've been blessed with growing up in Sydney, where there's so many Christian conferences, so many churches, good churches to go to. Could I share that maybe with people in another part of the world that don't have that opportunity? And so I assumed that I'd go overseas serving God, but then God opened my eyes to this group of people that we're calling everyday people who, as I said, make up 70% of the working population. But I began to notice that they weren't well represented in the churches that I was a part of. And so God put it in my heart to see if there was something that I could do to help our churches reach and disciple these people better.
So, what did you do with that desire to kind of draw together the churches and their demographic makeup and the wider Australian community? What is it that you've done for that?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about going overseas to do mission work in another country. I was really convicted that I would be fairly limited in my ability to disciple people in another country or context because I would be very clumsy with the language. I wouldn't understand the culture very well. It would take years to really be able to help people follow Jesus in that particular context. And so I was encouraged as I thought about cross-cultural ministry to think about investing deeply in a few people, some nationals, and helping them to know God and understand His word, and that they would be the ones that could then bring the gospel effectively to their people. And so as I saw that there weren't as many everyday people in our churches as there were in the community, and I looked at all the leaders in our churches that tended to be professionals or have a university background, I was really convinced, well, wouldn't it be the same that if we wanted to reach everyday people, that the best people to reach and disciple them would be other everyday people? And yet
Yeah.
we don't have many of them in our churches.
Mm.
Who are leaders and who are trained to serve in our churches. And so I thought, well, how could we do that better?
Can we just drill in a bit? Why do you reckon it is that there's such a mismatch between the kind of demographic makeup of our church, which is kind of tends towards professionalism,
Mm.
compared with the wider community? What's happened that meant we've ended up there?
Mm. I think it's our leadership training pathways that have done it. So over the last 50 years, it's really interesting to notice how the shift in our Bible colleges has the shift that's occurred in the type of people that are coming to our colleges. So I was speaking to someone who went to a Bible college in Sydney 50 years ago, and he shared that there were 20 people in his year at college. Uh, but only five of them had a university degree. So 15 didn't. So 75%, the majority didn't have a university degree before going to study at Bible college. When I went to study at Bible college in 2004, we had about 100 people in our year, and we would have been lucky to have 10 people who didn't have a university degree prior. So 90% of people did. So the people going to Bible college uh, tend to has there's a greater and greater percentage of university educated people going to our Bible colleges, and so that, I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because like attracts like. The type of leaders that you have in your church, they'll tend to attract people like them, and unless they're quite intentional in recruiting a diverse group of leaders around them who will then be able to reach a more diverse group of people, the church will be so fairly limited by the type of people that you have in the leadership of the church. So that's my conviction, and I suppose that's, yeah, particularly my focus to try and raise up more everyday Christian leaders for ministry in our churches.
You talked earlier about how there's a certain kind of cross-cultural element. And in a way, it feels kind of odd. Australians, we tend to think, oh, we're all equal, we're all the same, we're just Aussies. But
Mm.
would you say there are actually some distinctive cultural differences between the everyday people and professionals?
Yeah, I think there are. I mean, I think it shapes the way that you dress, the way that you talk, where you hang out socially, what sport you follow. All of those things are different depending on the particular, I suppose, social group that you're a part of. My wife Emma actually was really confronted by this a few years ago when she invited one of her friends from the dog training club that she was a part of to a gingerbread house making event, a Christmas evangelistic gingerbread house making event. And so she met her friend from dog training outside of the church before the event, and her friend was there smoking a cigarette, earrings sort of from the top bottom to the top of her ears. She was wearing this Santa Paws tank top because she loved dogs, and it's Christmas time, and she had some cargo army pants on. And as Emma stood out there talking to her, she smoked a cigarette before she came in. Emma was just struck by sort of quite uncomfortably about all the women who were going into this event as they stood outside waiting to go in. All of the women were wearing skirts and blouses with makeup on, all looking really pretty. And my wife was just like, how is my friend going to feel going into a room where everyone is dressed so differently and obviously from such a different social group? Now, people loved her when she came in. They didn't make any distinction because she was wearing much more casual clothes and all of that. But Emma was just so aware of just that, just being one example of how, yeah, of how people dress and hold themselves, that was potentially could be a barrier when you go into a room and not have other people dressed like you.
Sounds like a marvelous application there of what the Apostle James tells us about, when church happens and the poor person comes in and how you treat them versus when the wealthy person comes in and how you treat them.
Mm,
Sounded like that gingerbread making event. The people actually did a really good job of
they
saying, actually, we do have differences. Let's not pretend we don't. But at the same time, we're not going to judge you or hold you in particular regard
mm,
because of the way you appear or the fact that you had your smoke outside before coming on in.
mm,
We're not going to treat you as if you're not welcome on that basis because actually you are very welcome. I,
mm.
I wonder sometimes, is there a bit of a sense for everyday people that the professionals are looking down on them?
Well, yeah, unfortunately, I mean, we're all inherit a sinful heart that is proud and tends to look down on other people. And so I think, and yeah, sadly, in the workplace and in the world, people do look down on others who don't have the same education as them or don't have the same job that they have or, yeah, don't earn as much money. And so, yeah, I think because in the world, that's how people are treated and valued. Then, yeah, it's if you don't know a Christian community, you would just assume that why would they be any different?
Yeah, absolutely. That completely makes sense. So when we're thinking through this sort of stuff, what sort of things should I be aware of in myself? Because I did some university study before doing my own theological training, so I'm clearly landed in the professional end
Mm.
of kind of Australian society. What sort of things should I be alert to or conscious of so that I'm actively welcoming the everyday person who I come across?
Yeah, well, one of the first questions a professional will ask someone they meet for the first time is, "What do you do? What's your work? What job do you do?" This is fine if you've got a job that's well respected, like you're a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher. But if you're a cleaner or a truck driver, then it's not generally a job that's well respected or valued in our society. And so, unfortunately, that question is the first question that someone can ask a new person who's come to the door. If they're an everyday person, they may automatically assume they're going to be judged because that's what you're interested in knowing about them, what their work is. And so, a much more helpful question to ask someone you're meeting for the first time, once you know their name, is, what do you like to do for fun? What are your interests? What are your passions? What are your hobbies? And so, getting to know someone around the things that they enjoy, the things that they're interested in, are much more, I suppose, equal playing field in terms of having a basis for building a relationship and getting to know someone. That would be one example I would give. Other examples, I think, really just valuing people for who they are. We know that God makes everybody differently, and He makes them different for a reason, not because some are more valuable and less valuable, but because we're all equally valuable and just have a different part to play. Like in a body, there's hands and feet and eyes and nose. And so I think as you get to know everyday people, valuing, wanting to find out what are the things that they're good at, what are the things that they're passionate about, and how can they use those God-given passions and gifts to build up the church and to strengthen God's people. And so valuing them as we do, and as we should everybody that comes into our meetings and gatherings.
You said earlier that professionals tend to learn by kind of reading and writing. Everyday people tend to learn by doing. How does that kind of distinction maybe feed into the sort of things I ought to think about in my Bible study group?
Mm, mm. So I suppose if you're not confident in reading and comprehension, and that was difficult at school, then if you're in a Bible study that asks a series of comprehension questions and I suppose requires you to demonstrate an ability to read and comprehend, then that's a pretty scary thing to do. It's one of the things that I found really helpful in Bible studies, because we do want to gather together to read God's word, to hear God speak, and to encourage and challenge each other to live it in our lives day to day and week to week. That something like the Swedish method of Bible reading is a much less threatening way of engaging with the text than the Bible without having to work through a bunch of comprehension questions. So that when I talk about the Swedish method, that where you've got you've got your light bulb, which is what stands out to you, what strikes you in the passage, and everyone can share something that God has spoken in the way that God's Spirit has convicted them as they've heard God's word. Then what's a question you have about this passage? So what questions, what did you not understand, or what was something you want to think more about, and what does this mean for us and for our lives and how we should live? So it's much more discussion, engaging with the text, but not the way that God has been working in your life as you've heard it read.
And you can really see the way that certain educational models bring in that kind of comprehension style, what I call the guess what's in the teacher's head strategy, which, is a bit of a kind of succeed or fail kind of setup. And so it's probably not great for anyone, really. If you're going to ask people to make sure they've paid attention to the text, there's probably other ways to do it besides setting them something they can fail. And I hear that kind of Swedish method model where it is about noticing the things you've observed, so that it's a kind of question people in a way can't get wrong, because whatever they observed is what they observed. And that it's probably okay to have a bunch of questions and not even have answers to them all yet.
But those questions can also become that lead the discussion into exploring the passage further and thinking more deeply about it.
And I guess it probably also helps us maybe get out of our heads a bit in terms of application and think about the way that when the gospel's shaping us, it's shaping what we do as well as how we think and what we say. And I wonder whether there's things we need to learn from everyday people in that part of application.
Yeah, it's interesting you raised that, Jonathan, because I do notice that professionals love to think about the Bible and to understand the Bible. And if a sermon hasn't applied the passage, well, often if it's been an interesting, I suppose, exercise in understanding the Bible more deeply, then they might be quite satisfied. But for an everyday person who is more practical, they want to think, well, how is this going to help me in my life this week? And how is this going to shape my family? And so they're always thinking about, what does this mean? And they're often good at thinking about those things, thinking about what are the practical implications for this. And so I think that, one of their contributions is to help us think very practically about what the Bible means for our life, which again relates back to what you said in James, that where James wrote, the demons believe and shudder, but faith without deeds is dead. So you need to make sure that your life reflects what you believe and know about God and his gospel.
This has been really helpful. Thanks for chatting with us today, Andrew. And I reckon I'll pop into the show notes a link to the article that you've got on the Gospel Coalition Australia website. It's probably worth having a read through for people to follow up after having this chat today. Thanks for being with us for this episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jonathan.